Titans on the beat.
What's good, everyone? It's your boy Nati with another video for the channel. Welcome back to DMVSportsZone. And today we got another fantasy football week preview with my boy Noah. And we always try to bring you guys some fire content on the DMVSportsZone channel, and we're here back at it again with another one. So with that being said, you want to get started, Noah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Hope you guys tuned in to episode 1. A lot of the predictions that we were talking about came through, so we hope we can bring some more fire content this week.
For sure. And with that being said, let's get started. So with the first question, as always, who is one fantasy player that will come out of nowhere to break out week 2?
Ooh, that's tough. I think I gotta put it in 2 different positions. We saw last week with Malcolm Brown blowing up, but I think he's still under the radar. I think a lot of people are, there were a lot of games and people were taking in a lot of different players, but they kind of forgot about Malcolm Brown. And he's going against the Eagles this weekend, who we saw gave up a couple rushing touchdowns to a frankly pretty weak Redskins or Washington football team's rushing attack. So we see Malcolm Brown. He can do that against a good rushing defense. I think he's going to go off against the Eagles.
Okay.
My other choice is Ryan Tannehill, the Titans. He signed that big contract, and people were really questioning if he could pull through. He had 2 passing touchdowns last week. Believe it or not, his record since starting for the Titans has been 20 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions since 2019. So I know he's getting a lot of hate right now, but Ryan Tannehill went off last season, did pretty well week 1, and I see him doing very well week 2. If he's on the waiver wire, which he probably is, I'll put him on your bench because if he goes off another week, then everyone's going to try to look for him. So stash him while you can.
For sure. That's definitely a great pick. I have someone else who's on the Titans who I'll mention later when we get to a particular question. And I think the Titans offense will do pretty well this next week. But my pick for the breakout player, and I think it's pretty much a breakout player, and many people didn't hear about him except for SportAI, who actually predicted a mini sort of breakout last week, and that guy is James Robinson, the running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
There you go.
Yeah, he had the most yards by an undrafted rookie running back in week 1, history, with 62 yards on 16 carries to go along with a catch for 28 yards. The eyeball test on Sunday also showed that he was very much spry, very, very quick in and out of the backfield. And, it sort of counters the slow 40-yard time that we saw at the NFL Combine earlier this year with a 4.64. So I think he really showed that good potential that you want to see in the Jacksonville Jaguars backfield. And he's also set up for a lot of carries in that backfield, right? With even offensive coordinator Jay Gruden, who was the head coach here for a period of time, noted that Robinson can for sure carry an intense workload. So that bodes well as him being a very viable fantasy back come week 2. Top of that, of course, there's no Leonard Fournette. He was released before the season. You got an unproven Divine Ozigbo as the RB2 behind him. And then Chris Thompson is just a third down back, right? He doesn't really do too much more than that. He also doesn't do too less than that. So I think at this point, James Robinson pretty much has that starting running back spot down in Jacksonville. And I know Jacksonville might not be the most appealing of offenses, both in real life and in fantasy, but James Robinson, he's getting all the carries, and they don't really have too many weapons down there. So I think he's a very good play this week. And on top of that, you can look at the matchup against the Titans, and it's pretty decent, right? The Titans just gave up 78 yards and a touchdown and 5.2 yards per carry to Melvin Gordon, who's someone who for years doesn't really get too many yards per carry, right? Whether he be in San Diego, Los Angeles, or now Denver. So that was pretty good on that part. And Titans overall have a middle of the pack rush defense, in my opinion. So I think Robinson again will have a pretty decent week and will sort of come out of nowhere, right? Because he wasn't really on anybody's radar except for SportAI. So
Yeah, shout out. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have him for week 2. We do have him with a relatively high score plus. A couple factors that add to that positive outlook is they recently signed Bruce Miller. If you don't remember him, he was the 49ers fullback. He actually hasn't played in the NFL games in 2016. Interestingly enough, him and Aldon Smith coming back after 4 to 5 years are pretty crazy, but it shows a commitment to a new style of offense. As Fournette had that a couple years ago when he ran for over 1,100. I'm not saying Robinson's going to be running for 1,100, but everything is set for him to succeed. And most importantly, against the Colts last week, not a single other running back got a carry, which is pretty crazy. Only James Robinson got a carry. They're going to try to carry that momentum into week 2 with Minshew becoming, that surprise passing threat with DJ Chark. They're pretty underrated passing core. Eifert. Yeah, I could definitely see James Robinson going off.
Okay. Yeah, I again agree with you, and I'm excited to see what he brings week 2 against the Titans. So, with that being said, can you give me, Noah, 2 great fantasy plays this week that fantasy owners should be looking out for?
2 additional players that I think people already have on their radar. We talked about the sleepers. I would go actually to Raheem Mostert. I know actually he's in an interesting place where he was picked in a lot of fantasy drafts, but he's not really highly touted. But we saw that Mostert is surprisingly taking that load. They did have McKinnon come in there for a touchdown. Tevin Coleman coming in. But right now, Coleman's having some health issues right now, unfortunately. So it will be Mostert and McKinnon going forward. And they're having a very, very strong matchup in the form of the Jets. And the Jets have one of the worst defenses in the NFL, particularly against the run. And Shanahan has a creative attack. I think Mostert
got to factor in Adams, right, no longer being there, and also like
exactly
out of CJ Mosley.
So we'll see, but I am confident Mostert is going to go off for week 2. And the other that's a little bit under everyone's radar, but I still think people should pay attention to is another quarterback. You mentioned him last week, Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray saw that even when the passing lanes are clogged, he has the creativity and the speed to run, and that's very important for fantasy, particularly in a PPR league. Kyler Murray has an ideal matchup in the fact that his opponent plays zone defense. They're playing a zone defense right now. And we saw that Niners zone defense got shredded by his running ability. So Murray, all it takes for him is, 2 to 3 plays where he escapes the pocket and he makes something out of nothing. There are very few players in the league that at a quarterback position that could say that. The only other guys you can say are Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, maybe Josh Allen, but those guys are on everyone's radar. So Kyler Murray is, in Yahoo Fantasy League, he's only owned in 65% last time I checked. So he's there for a lot of people to pick up off the waivers. So those are 2 guys that I would keep looking at for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those 2 picks. And Kyler Murray, as I've been saying for a couple weeks now, I think he has a legit shot of being both the real life MVP and the fantasy MVP this year. I really think he has that sort of potential, and he is going to be playing against some pretty soft defenses coming up. But I don't know about Washington. Washington seems like they're up for the challenge and stuff, but he does have a pretty favorable schedule as a whole. So looking forward to seeing more out of him. The 2 great plays that I have this week, one, first and foremost, is Devontae Adams, wide receiver for the Packers.
Okay.
Adams is the guy in the Packers receiving core. He's just being fed targets, one play after the other by the great Aaron Rodgers. And he had a monster game last week, putting up 156 yards on 14 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And to even make this more impressive, he had 103 yards on 9 catches and 1 touchdown by halftime last week. So that lets you know how much he was dominating. And I know the Vikings secondary isn't all that and stuff, but at the same time, that's some pretty decent production. And what really makes him stand out mostly to me as a leading fantasy receiver, and probably with Michael Thomas going down now with injury for a couple of weeks, the fantasy wide receiver number 1 at the end of the season, is that Adams' target share is astronomical. He's getting 38.6% of Rodgers' targets in the passing game. when you got a guy like Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball and you are pretty much getting 40% of the targets, like that's a lot of work. And I'm looking forward to Adams continuing that great production into this week. So Adams really gets you everything you want in a fantasy wide receiver, right? He has the immense talent, which we discussed a little bit last week. Immense talent, is in his physical prime, and he has plenty of opportunity with no legit wide receiver 2 behind him, right? You have Scantling and Lazard, but those aren't like legit wide receiver 2 guys that could feed into or cut away some of his targets and stuff, sort of like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Like that's a whole different situation. So on top of that, Adams' matchup this week is also really tasty. He goes up against the Lions secondary, which gave up the 5th most fantasy points last week, and also gave up a ton of points to a Bears passing offense that we all know is not all that, and Allen Robinson is a little furious about, right? Like, because he's just not getting enough targets. So yeah, I think he's ready to feast this week. I really believe that. And then with my second pick, I will go with someone who not a lot of people are hyping up this week, and Nick Chubb, the running back for the Browns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Chubb, he didn't have the greatest of games last week. I think he had like 60 yards on like 10 carries, so that's not great production. And Kareem Hunt also like cut away some of the snaps that Chubb was getting out of the backfield, and that's not great for a viable running back one threat as the season goes along. But as we saw last year, whenever the Browns lost big in a game, the next week they just fed Chubb like play after play after play. And I think Chubb is just that talented to sort of get that sort of opportunity this week as well. I do worry again that Hunt will eat into his carries long term. But in this week, with a favorable game script, in my opinion, because they are playing against the Bengals, and we know the Bengals are slightly improved from last year, but at the same time, their defense is just not all that. And I think with the Browns no longer coming back from behind like they did last week against the Ravens and that blowout loss, I think Chubb will get fed a lot of carries and will actually be a very productive back and will be a legit running back one force this week. I really believe that. Although, again, his long-term potential, in my opinion, is just not there.
Yeah, it's really interesting how both Devontae Adams and Nick Chubb aren't guys that are particularly like the previous questions we were talking about the under the radar player. They're guys that everyone has drafted. They're guys everyone has known. But they're players that at the same time are weirdly underrated. I think people forgot Nick Chubb ran for over 1,400 yards last year. I don't think people remember that. With Kareem Hunt there too. And like you said, if they need to, they can feed him, and he's proven to be the workhorse. Devontae Adams too, really underrated player, not only in real life but in fantasy. With Michael Thomas going down, Devontae Adams can change a season for a team. So if you need to, I would definitely try to trade for him right now. I think that his value is still high. You're going to have to give up a good 1 or 2 players, but you need a receiver, a true number 1. Looks like the long term, the only few guys are Julio Jones, Hopkins, Devontae Adams. I think that's a short list of the true number 1 receiver in fantasy. So even if you have to give up your running back 2, your tight end, do so right now before his value gets too high.
Sure, definitely agree there as always. And moving right along, Noah, can you give me 2 disappointing fantasy duds that we should probably worry about a little bit this week?
Yeah, there are a couple. I think that you may have to be careful for the running backs in New York, both of them. I think Le'Veon Bell and Saquon are a little bit of trouble. I know that Saquon, had a tough run defense against the Steelers, but the Giants' offensive line is the worst ranked in football now. They're the lowest ranked when it comes to rushing attack. Not only from this year, because that's a small sample size, but from the last 6 games of last year, they're ranked the lowest run-focused offensive line in the league. Saquon is starting to get overwhelmed. They don't have a true number 1 receiver. They have Sterling Shepard, they have Evan Ingram, who is a good tight end, but not someone that's going to tear away the defense from Saquon. So I don't see a good future, and unfortunately, Saquon may be the biggest draft bust this year. It's early to say, but the offensive line of the Giants only got worse. Their draft picks that they try, their big signings, Nate Solder, Will Hernandez, have turned out to be disappointments. They haven't been able to change their offense, and I don't see the Giants' offense as a whole doing well this year. So Saquon is someone I would avoid for the foreseeable future, not just this week.
Okay.
And then the other one is Le'Veon Bell. Very similar situation. Way too many question marks on that Jets offense. Adam Gase proved that he'll give them the carries, but when he starts to struggle, Le'Veon Bell gets taken out. And that's not a good coaching move in real life, and in fantasy, that definitely affects Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
He's someone that can get catches in the backfield as well, but they like to throw in the slant. You saw Jamison Crowder got a majority of the catches in the short to mid-yardage range that resulted in a touchdown, which further hurts Le'Veon's value. They're not going to use him in the passing attack. So I know a lot of people already had Le'Veon Bell as a down, but I don't see a rebound anytime soon. Yeah. So the two running backs from New York, if you're a New York area fan, then enjoy the ride. It's not going to be a good one this year.
Yeah. Man, might we see 2 straight dud seasons out of Le'Veon Bell? That'd be crazy.
That'll be painful.
And the year before with the holdout, yeah. That's bad.
Should have stayed in Pittsburgh, in my opinion.
Yeah, he should have. Yeah, they look legit right now. Their defense is legit, and if they had Le'Veon Bell back there, that would have been great. But they don't, and I guess we'll just go through some other fantasy duds that you guys should take note of this week. My first one would probably be Melvin Gordon, the running back for the Broncos. And
speaking of the Steelers,
yeah,
gotta go against him.
Yeah. So he did have a terrible fumble early on Monday night, but after that he had a pretty solid game against the Titans, and he largely outtouched Phillip Lindsay. So I think he definitely has that running back 1 spot carved out for him in that offense in Denver. I do see Gordon as being a legit running back 2 as the season progresses, especially because he got paid like it this offseason, and he just looked better in my eyes than he did last year when he was with Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Chargers. So at the same time, though, you mentioned the Steelers. He is getting one of the worst, if not the worst, fantasy matchup against Pittsburgh this week. And Pittsburgh run defense, talked about Saquon earlier, gave up 6 yards on only 15 carries to Saquon Barkley. So they didn't just limit this guy. They pretty much stopped him, and that's saying a lot, right? When we're talking about Barkley and everything. And I get the offensive line, the Giants' offensive line is not all that, and they really struggled throughout the game and stuff. But Steelers' rush defense was really up to par, and they're going up against Gordon this week, and I think he'll have a very rough outing. I don't think, if at all possible, fantasy owners don't start him. I really don't think he will do well this week. But moving away from the running backs, which we've talked about extensively in this video, I'll give you a wide receiver, DK Metcalf.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. DK had a great game on Sunday against the Falcons' putrid pass defense, racking up 95 yards and a touchdown on only 4 catches. I see both Metcalf and Lockett, who the latter I own in one of my leagues, and I'm happy about that, being fantasy wide receiver 2s when the season's over with, especially because Seattle looks to continue a more pass-happy sort of offense than they've had in previous years. Despite this, though, I do think Metcalf has a terrible matchup against the Patriots secondary this week, and he will particularly be lined up against the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Stephon Gilmore, because of the fact that Metcalf largely plays on the outside and not in the slot, where Tyler Lockett pretty much has that down for Seattle. So I think despite the super high hopes that I have, and I know Noah has, and I know many people have for the talented second-year receiver, I just don't see his fantasy output being too great against the Patriots this week. And he might be startable as maybe a flex option, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. I definitely agree with the Metcalf situation. The Patriots have a very strong, I think more importantly, when you're looking at a deep threat, vertical threat type of receiver, you need to see beyond the corner and you need to see the safety.
Yeah.
What's their safety core like? And with McCourty, I don't see Metcalf doing very well. They're going to hone in on him. If you saw all the big plays by Metcalf last week, It was a 4th and 5, threw it deep. Just the safety wasn't there. It was a one-on-one with the corner. When you're Metcalf and you're 6'3" and you're 230, you're going to get that ball. But the Patriots defense doesn't make a lot of mistakes in that backfield, defensive backfield. So, but I think it's interesting with Gordon because the score plus for him came out as pretty strong actually for this week, which interestingly enough, against the Pittsburgh defense, but also Phillip Lindsay is probably going to be out this week. So that plays into Gordon's favor. Also, the run attack of the Broncos is a little bit different than that of the Giants. They run more of a zone run, but they also can run power. So the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, they thrive most on a good old-fashioned, bull rush coming in to clog the lane. They spread the ball out. I think Gordon can come out to the outside. So it's really interesting because there are a lot of negatives for Gordon. The fumble problems he's had, the strong run defense of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But with Phillip Lindsay out and Royce Freeman more of a pass-catching back despite being 220 pounds, which is pretty interesting. Gordon, they will lean on him heavily. And, even if he doesn't rack up the yards, he gets something that Barkley actually surprisingly struggles with, which is red zone touches. Gordon has gotten every single red zone touch so far. There's been only one game, but towards the end of the LA season last year, he had 82% of all the red zone touches by a running back, even with Austin Eckler. And Austin Eckler and Royce Freeman are very similar types of players. So Melvin Gordon, it will be a wait and see, but I think that he could be a sleeper. No running back 1, but maybe a flex or low-end running back 2 this week.
That's fair. And even like with the Giants, I remember watching it on Monday night, and like Dion Lewis was sort of playing more than I thought he would play. Like there were a couple of drives and it was just Dion Lewis in the backfield, and I was wondering a little bit why, but then it started making sense because Saquon's not the best pass blocker, right, in the backfield. So Melvin Gordon is a pretty good pass blocker. He's the guy that could stay on the field all 3 downs, and I do see his long-term effect, long-term impact being really great in Denver. But I also understand, he could be okay like as a flex option, but like you said, as a running back 1, running back 2, I just don't know if he's gonna have that sort of production this week.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But you should trust SportAI though. They're spot on. So if it comes down to them or my lonely opinion, then I would trust SportAI for sure.
Hey, appreciate it, man. But hey.
And then with the last question, as we usually set up every single week, who will be your fantasy MVP for week 2, Noah?
Fantasy MVP for week 2. Ooh. That's really going to be tough. I think it depends on the league.
Yeah.
But if I want to pick someone, that's just gonna, go off and really help the team, regardless of what the league is. I think again, I'm gonna have to go and lean in again on Lamar Jackson.
Okay.
Lamar Jackson has an offense that's clicking so well that regardless of their opponent, somebody will go off. We saw last week was Mark Andrews, J.K. Dobbins. This week we could see, Hollywood Brown, Mark Ingram. They have Mark Ingram as the veteran backup now, even though he made the Pro Bowl last year. People forgot about that. And they have the best offensive line in football. They're incredibly deep. Lamar Jackson, nearly perfect passer rating last week, can run the ball. I think Lamar Jackson, honestly, could not only have a fantasy MVP season for this week, but he could be the back-to-back MVP. Yeah, everything is in his power. The Ravens really did a great job building a team around him and an offense that fits him well. Everyone that's a core of that offense is a long-term contract to build that chemistry. And, they don't have to worry about contract negotiations. There's no holdouts. They cut Earl Thomas, who was causing locker room issues. So now they have a very well-meshed team. I see Lamar Jackson, back-to-back MVPs this season and back-to-back fantasy MVPs for week 1 and week 2.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. I definitely think this year, so last year I drafted him like towards the later round of fantasy draft, and I sort of knew that he had something in him, and I thought he was going to be a really good quarterback, and maybe not MVP level like he was last year, but I thought he was going to have a good year. And I definitely agree with you. He has a legit shot. I think, along with Kyler Murray, of being both the fantasy MVP and real life MVP. I feel like with Baltimore though, they have pretty much everything set up for Lamar. Like defense wise, offense wise, like everything is there. So Lamar Jackson might be the back-to-back MVP. That's definitely reasonable for you to say, and definitely reasonable for it to happen. So, but straying away from Lamar Jackson, I have as my fantasy MVP Derrick Henry, the running back for the Titans this week. I really believe this guy. I mean, we all know he's a beast, right? He is a must-start week 1, week 2, week 3, week whatever, back for fantasy owners. And I don't think that was really the case earlier in his career because of the fact that, like, you know, he wasn't getting all the touches out of the backfield for some reason. And I remember drafting him one year and he was just a bust. It was just not good. But the last 1.5 years, like he's really gone on. And despite the low efficiency last week, he still toted the rock 31 times against an underrated Denver defense. Yeah, 31 times. Didn't have too great of a yards per carry, but 116 yards. So pretty good there. And this week he's playing against a defense that he's historically been exciting, been great against in the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, who lost their best defensive lineman in Calais Campbell in the offseason. And Jacksonville's offense might be better than what people think, but their defense is not good. And Derrick Henry, I think he's in for a really great game. And I think that's a great point. Yeah, we talked about this earlier in the week and earlier on this video too, but with game script, I don't believe the Titans will be coming back from behind much in this game against the Jaguars. So I think that will just ultimately call for a huge workload for Henry, as we've seen in the past, and as him being the centerpiece of that Titans run-heavy offense. I also think Henry will be more active in the passing game, more so than he was last week. And that's largely because, well, one, Deion Lewis is no longer there, right? Like, he's in New York. And also Darrington Evans might possibly miss another game due to injury. So Derrick Henry is really all they got at this point. And we don't know if Evans will be healthy, but even if he is, I just think Henry will get some more catches out of the backfield. I really believe that against this weak Jacksonville Jaguars defense. So ultimately, I believe Henry is a great fantasy play this week, and will have a great fantasy performance as he has had numerous times in the past against even better defenses. So that's pretty much it in terms of the questions and stuff. Noah, do you want to plug SportAI to the fantasy owners out there, but just the general DMVSportsZone crowd?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I know that Nati and I have mentioned SportAI before, but basically the summarization of SportAI is it's a mobile app that's integrated with a artificial intelligence backend that helps you optimize your fantasy lineups in 10 seconds or less. It's something that we've been working hard on over here. And then, shout out Nati and DMVSportsZone, allowing us to come on this platform and talk more about it. And, the proof's in the pudding, right? We called early on, the Malcolm Brown, James Robinson, and we have tons of users that, beta users that are reaching out using our artificial intelligence to optimize our lineups, and they've come back. Five people last week personally messaged me just to say, hey, close matchup, and I came out on top this week. So, it's curious. This will be our chance to test it in real world data, and so far so good. And appreciate all the support that's what we've been getting recently, and we promise that we'll get the mobile app out soon. And until then, check out our content. Check out DMVSportsZone and all the collaborations that are to follow.
For sure. Yeah, it's great, guys. Again, it was very, very good last week, and maybe I should have trusted it a little bit more than I did, but it was really good. And yeah, thank you, Noah, again, for coming on here. We're gonna, again, have these weekly videos where we're previewing the upcoming week's matchups and stuff, and it's been really fun as always, Noah. But with that being said, guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the DMVSportsZone channel. It'd be greatly appreciated as we try to post fire content as much as possible on here. We also have a Twitter at DMVSportsZone and an Instagram page, all lowercase DMVSportsZone, where we post fire content on there as well. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and have a good one. Peace.
Peace.